Okay, good afternoon from Southwest Michigan. My name is Josh Haas. I'm with the Hawk Migration Association of North America, and we are pleased to welcome all of you to what will surely be a great program in our monthly series. We're really excited to have our speakers today and that have them speaking on such a desirable topic for many of our constituents. So thanks to Tricia and Mike for being with us, and we'll get to that shortly. Before, though, I do want to go through a few housekeeping items like normal. You will notice that you don't have the ability to unmute yourselves. That is on purpose. And what we're asking you to do is to please open up that chat window at the bottom of your Zoom window and engage with us. Do a couple things for us. One, tell us where you're coming from. In addition to that, we will be using all the chat rather for all of our questions. So please open up that chat, even if you're not going to say hi and tell us where you're calling in from. Please use that chat to ask questions throughout the presentation. And at the end, the famous Julie Brown, who's on with us, will roll those questions up and facilitate the question and answer time with our speakers. So thank you again for joining us. One last thing with Zoom, if you don't like your current view, feel free to click view at the upper right-hand corner and you can customize that view the way you like. With that, I'll turn it over to Julie, who will introduce our speakers. Go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I'm the Raptor Migration and Programs Director at HMANA, and we're thrilled to have Tricia and Mike here today. Golden eagles are always the highlight, always an high area of interest in the Hawk Watch community, especially in the East. I'm here in New Hampshire, and I always have a lot of questions about just their breeding and their migration movements and overwintering. So I'm really excited. I also wanted to just add that, if you don't already get HMANA's e-newsletter, which we send out about once a month, please sign up, and you can do so by just typing in your email in the chat, and I'll add you to that. So to give you a little bit of background, Dr. Tricia Miller has been studying birds for over 20 years and has been tracking and studying eagles for more than 15 years. She has a long-standing interest in bird conservation and spatial ecology. Dr. Miller works as a senior research wildlife biologist and is the executive director of Conservation Science Global, where she studies movement ecology and conservation of raptors, especially eagles. Her research integrates telemetry and spatial modeling to address conflicts with human development. She's an adjunct faculty at West Virginia University and received her BS in biology from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and her MS and Ph.D. in ecology from Penn State. Her Ph.D. research focused on the Eastern North American population of golden eagles. And Michael Lanzone is the CEO of Cellular Tracking Technologies, a company that develops high-end animal tracking devices for studies conducted across the globe. Over his career, he has worked for various state and federal agencies and not-for-profit organizations across the country. He was director of the Bioacoustics and Biomonitoring Laboratory at Carnegie Museum of Natural History's Powder Mill Avian Research Center, co-founder of the Eastern Golden Eagle Working Group, and was assistant coordinator for the second Pennsylvania Breeding Bird Atlas. He's worked on many other research and banding projects across the world and has specialized in technological advancements and applied conservation in ornithology, including bioacoustics and golden eagle ecology and conservation. So with that, welcome, Trish and Mike. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie. Thanks for inviting us to do this talk. It's always fun to talk to HMANA crowd. We're sitting here in Cape May, New Jersey, at Mike's office, and we're so happy to be here.
Yeah, and so I think this is kind of a cool talk for us because we've only ever given a talk similar to this once at Fall Fest a few years ago. But so many people over the years have asked us, how did you guys get to where you are? So a few years ago we were asked to do a similar talk to this about our journey, and really our journey kind of goes along with our story of the golden eagle. And so today we're going to talk to you about, our golden opportunity, our journey studying the ghosts of the eastern forests. Let's get my clicker to work. There we go.
The start of this journey begins with, of course, the magnificent golden eagle. It's the most widely distributed eagle in the world, and the most common national bird, with 9 countries having the golden eagle as their national bird. It's also the most thoroughly studied eagle in the world, yet virtually nothing was known about this eastern population in North America prior to 1990. Formal studies were not conducted until about the mid-90s.
I'm going to stop you there for a second. It's supposed to be about our journey, so I think we should start way back a little further than that to really help everyone understand our story. We need to really tell more about our story leading up to the Eastern Golden Eagle Project and how we got there. Sorry, there's a delay on the slide.
Yeah.
Scanner here, so.
Yeah, I think you're right. We should tell the whole story about how golden eagles have helped shape our lives, our families, our careers, and how much we've learned about them over that time.
And how kind of the development of through the Golden Eagle Project, how it turned everything we did at the company, that I run now, into all the animals being able to talk to one another via the internet of wildlife.
So let's go back in time to the 1980s.
Some of you remember that. So here we are in the 1980s. I was a young birder at the time.
And I was busy water skiing, not sure that we could be more different. Mike was definitely a geek back then, and I was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was kind of a bird geek. I really wasn't considered cool until I got to get out of school early every day to go raptor banding up to Braddock Bay, and everyone wanted to be a bird watcher. I spent my young time, my young life doing a lot of butterfly stuff and watching birds, and eventually wound up in Cape May, where I was a first official swing counter.
Well, water skiing didn't really keep my interest forever. Eventually, like sometime in my 20s, in the mid to late 90s, I did get interested in birds, and especially raptors.
Raptors eventually brought us together, and if Jerry Ligori were here today, he'd be sure to tell you, if it wasn't for him dragging me out to the Gochu Mountains in Nevada, I would have never met Trish. And top right there is a picture of Jerry and I, and another guy that was helping us up at the watch there up at the Gochu Mountains.
So kudos to Jerry. This part of this talk is dedicated to him for sure. So from 1998 on, we worked together and traveled around to work different field jobs, and we eventually settled at Powdermill Nature Reserve in Southwest Pennsylvania.
Tricia and I had been interested in golden eagles for a really long time, and really, were intrigued by goldens when we lived near State College. Shortly after we moved there, we learned of this hawk loss just outside of town, where most of the golden eagles are counted during spring migration. We volunteered, visited often, and eventually became a director there, helping to hire counters and raise funds. And some of you know the site as Tussey Mountain.
Was at Powdermill Nature Reserve where our golden opportunity really occurred. We saved this article from 2002, and we actually just found it recently. It was quite a coincidence that we had named our talk Golden Opportunity long before we had found this, and then we found this article and was like, wow. So little did we know how golden eagles would shape our lives and what a truly golden opportunity it would be.
So here we are again, back at golden eagles, back to the magnificent golden eagle. And, shortly after we had moved to Powdermill, we have been talking about this golden eagle project, and, everything was still fresh from our, time back in State College. And this guy, Todd Katzner, moved to the National Aviary in Pittsburgh, and director of Pottermill said, "Hey, I called a meeting, with this guy from the National Aviary, and the cool thing is he studies eagles." And so Tricia and I were very intrigued about this guy who studied imperial eagles, and we're very excited to tell him about our desire to study eastern golden eagles.
So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background for those that are unfamiliar with golden eagles in the East. This map has changed quite a bit. I made this map back in 2012. We've learned more about them since. But golden eagles breed throughout most of Labrador and much of Quebec. And they also breed in Ontario as well as Manitoba, even up north into Nunavut. So the map has expanded on knowledge of where they breed. When they migrate down primary corridor, the Appalachian Mountains, but they'll also, especially birds from Western Quebec and Ontario and Manitoba, will migrate through the Great Lakes region. And many birds pass by Hawk Ridge in Duluth and Mackinac Straits, both during spring and fall migration, down by Hawk Cliff, and of course all the watches down the Appalachian Mountains. And some even show up in Cape May. So they
breed in tundra, taiga, and boreal forests, and temperate and mixed forest as well. And at least in the eastern United States, they are more associated with tundra areas. At least that's historically where a lot of our where we know our eagles have bred. However, from some of the stuff that we've learned both in Sweden, where this left picture was taken, they do also nest in large trees up there, and additionally, one of our other eagles was recently found nesting in a large tree in Manitoba.
Yeah. Actually, all the nests in Manitoba are probably in trees because there aren't really a lot of cliffs there. So where you don't have cliffs, they'll nest in trees readily. During the winter, they spend their time in forests, and they'll also be found in coastal wetlands, hunting things like snow geese and Canada geese and other waterfowl. Like I said, they like to eat many things, but really they'll eat waterfowl, waders, hares, and they'll also eat corvids, but one of their favorite foods in the winter are wild turkeys. And we have more than a few photos and videos, such as this one, of golden eagles going after turkeys. And we actually got some cool pictures from Alabama a couple years ago showing that one had clearly killed a turkey. This is an ongoing fight with Ted cancer. But they also eat carrion. We're going to talk more about carrion in a bit, but take a look at this really cool video that was sent to one of our colleagues from out in Yellowstone National Park. So first you got to figure out how many eagles there were, and then see if you spot anything else. So they actually have to share their meals out there with mountain lions. They don't have to do the same in the East, however.
So by the time we moved to southwestern Pennsylvania, we knew that a lot of golden eagles migrated along the Appalachians. We were lucky enough to live near the Allegheny Front Hawk Lodge, one of the best places of the East to get amazing views of low-flying eagles. Tricia and I, again, started talking about tracking eastern golden eagles to learn a little bit more about them.
And that became even more important because the ridge tops where these eagles were migrating, and we would later find out were also wintering, were being slated for wind power development. So that's really the impetus of this project.
And from other places like Altamont Pass in California and Samoa in Norway, poorly sighted wind turbines can be problematic for eagles. And the left photo there is white-tailed sea eagles from the island of Samoa, and the right being a golden eagle from Altamont Pass.
Trish, if I If I could jump in for a second, we're not hearing you as clearly as we're hearing Mike. You might need to just talk a little bit closer to the mic. Thank you.
Is that better?
That's great.
Okay, so we had a conservation problem to solve, but the Pennsylvania Game Commission told us, and they told us they were interested in giving us money, but others have tried to catch adult golden eagles and failed. So we set about trying to capture adult golden eagles so that we could get funding to track them. So here we are with Todd Katzner constructing this first blind up on Carl Streetig's property on Bald Eagle Ridge. And that was only minutes from Penn State, where I was working on my master's at the time.
Yeah, and like Tricia said, she was working on her master's, and but we all know, whenever we're going in school, in school, especially me from my younger years, when the wind's blowing in the right direction for migration, it's hard to keep us from watching hawks. And in this case, trying to catch an eagle.
So I was 6 months pregnant with our oldest daughter, Phoebe, and I simply had to skip class. And I think I'm so glad I did, and I think Carl was pretty darn happy I did as well. We caught our first eagle, proving that we could do it. Unfortunately, I couldn't have a beer to celebrate.
Sorry, I was trying to turn up the microphone volume there.
So I have to say that spot is absolutely a spectacular place to watch eagles. And in the fall of 2019, they counted 324 eagles passing that watch, which I believe is a record for the East. So that is pretty amazing.
So 1 year later, funding in hand from the Pennsylvania Game Commission, we started catching eagles, and at the Allegheny front with our daughter Phoebe hanging out with us in the blind. This time, Trish could have a beer.
And we tagged our first one.
Yeah.
Baby's now 16 and has grown up around birds all her life. We've loved being able to share it with her. She's handled a lot of golden eagles in her 13 years and a few other species as well. She actually, I trap in a blind down here in Cape May, and she's my #1 helper out there. Last year, she probably caught 30 merlins in the mist net and was my bander in charge in the blind. So it's really cool that, she didn't get sick of it.
Yeah, and she actually just returned from Camp Chiricahuas, which is a young birders camp, and loved it and made some other friends. She was shocked to find out there was actually other young kids around her age that also like birds.
But until recently, of course, her favorite eagle was not the golden eagle, it was the bald eagle. This is her when she was 3 years old, helping out in Virginia.
So we began collaborating with other researchers in many states in Canada, tagging and tracking golden eagles.
In 2010, our youngest daughter, Willow, was born, and she wasn't a stranger to golden eagles either.
Willow's now 11, and she's been a great research assistant as well. Here's some pictures of her various places that she has been with us. And she likes other things, but unlike her sister, she isn't as much into watching birds, but she's very interested in helping us in the field any way she can, and is always very excited to be around us, around nature. And yeah.
So with our collaborators, we formulated many research questions, and we started the Eastern Golden Eagle Working Group. We were focused on identifying or estimating the population size. At the time when we started the project in 2005, it was estimated that there was 1,000 to 2,000 birds in the wild or in this eastern population. Now the estimate is up around 5,000. We're also looking at demography and distribution, migratory connectivity, habitat and home range and habitat use, as well as migration patterns and flight behavior and threats.
Here's an early poster from a scientific meeting to show what we are trying to do. One of the main things we realized is that we needed a graduate student to work on the project. In fact, we had a perfect candidate. Tricia had recently completed her master's and had the skills we needed. A PhD candidate was born.
We could turn down this project studying golden eagles.
Yeah.
So we also soon realized that we were not getting enough data, the data that we needed to answer our questions. So here's a track, one of the first tracks during spring migration, showing an eagle migrating through Pennsylvania. And this is our study area. And we had like, I think 10 points or something like that. Not that many points. Oh, I guess we got 7 data points in flight. And remember that we're trying to understand how flight behavior is influenced by topography. And we knew we were going to need a lot more data than we could get from these satellite tracking units.
Yeah, remember this was, over 15 years ago now, or 17 years ago. Yeah, and so, it wasn't as easy as it is now to generate GPS points and send them over the air. And so, we realized this is a problem. So I started calling all the available telemetry companies out there, and I'm like, hey, can you help us try to collect more data? We really just need, your units to, I understand they could only get 7 to 10 GPS points a day, but can we do it like all in an hour? I tried to talk to them. They weren't interested at all. They're like, no, these only work one way, and that's all they work. You take it or leave it. And I said, well, I have a really good idea to make a cellular unit. Would you be interested in helping me do that? And they're like, no, we have no interest in helping you do that. And I remember the call Tricia and Todd and I had, we were very frustrated because we're like, we really need a lot more data points here. And at the end of the call, I'm like, well, I'm just going to do this myself. And there was a long pause. And Todd's like laughing, and he's like, yeah, Mike, why don't you just give me a call when you do that? So, I had this idea for a cellular unit for a long time. And, when you do that, your friends and family, every time they have an old cell phone, and remember, these were back in the days of flip phones, they would give me their old cell phones. I had tons of old GPS units from, ones that weren't functioning anymore. And so I got off the phone, I opened up the drawer, took a whole bunch of stuff out and started taking it apart to see how it worked. And you can see in the upper right there, I started wiring things together, and it was kind of a big nest of wires, but I successfully was the first person to transmit GPS data over the cell network. And I was so excited. I just did a quick program, and I called Todd back up the next day, and I'm like, I did it. He's like, you did what? And I'm like, I transmitted GPS data over the cell network. It will work. And he's like, oh my God, that's awesome. He's like, well, how big is it? I'm like, well, that's a problem. I said, we need to figure out how to make it smaller. And so, so I worked on trying to make it smaller and smaller, because, of the challenges back then, it wasn't like it is now. I really needed somebody with a bit more expertise of what was the smallest equipment and where, and I'll get into that in a minute.
So while he was forming the company, I got my PhD on movement ecology of eastern golden eagles. That's got sketched.
Yeah, that's all right. But anyway, so meanwhile, I tracked down this guy, Casey Halverson, who helped me develop the cell tracker it is now. So Todd and Casey and I started working on this, and later patented this tracking device. The cool thing about it is, when we look back at our satellite track birds, we collected over 250 times more data than our satellite birds. And these were two of the better birds in the triangles there that we had satellite unit on. In comparison, the new cellular units are below.
So the satellite tracking points are an hour apart, and the other points are about 30 seconds apart. And so we didn't just know where the birds were going, but we found out how they got there. And that was the important part in being able to answer the questions that we were interested in answering. So these high frequency data are really key to identifying this fine scale influence of topography and weather on flight behavior. Here you can see a bird using orographic updrafts or slope soaring, moving along one of the Appalachian ridges.
So I was so excited, you know, as I mentioned before, I grew up at Braddock Bay, New York, and when our first eagle passed over Braddock Bay, I was ecstatic. I'm like, oh my God, this is so awesome. I had to see, you know, when that was. And so I, you know, zooming into the data, I looked to see exactly what time it went over the hawk watch. And I was so excited. And I called them up and they're like, oh, we didn't get to the hawk watch yet that day. so they missed the first golden eagle I had go over, right over the watch. Low over the watch. So it was crazy and it also telling too, because, you know, they didn't expect the golden eagle to be going over the hawk watch at 9 o'clock in the morning, apparently. So, but in any case, you know, that was really cool.
So we don't only see flight behaviors like orographic and slope soaring, but the telemetry units can also pick up thermal soaring. So this is a track showing points in 1 second intervals down in the, I think it's in Virginia or West Virginia. And you can see the birds soaring up in a circle and gliding down and hitting the next thermal and soaring back up. So it really gave us insights into how these birds were behaving. So a really important part of this project was catching eagles. And we first started catching birds during migration, like up at Carl's Place, down at the Allegheny Front. And while we were in a blind on Bald Eagle Mountain down at Marcia Bonta's place, Mike was talking to one of the Pennsylvania Game Commission conservation officers. And he mentioned that he was getting lots of golden eagles on a deer dump near Bedford, Pennsylvania. And he agreed to take us there for a visit.
So we went and looked and he told us, you know, kind of what they did. And little did we know that, you know, we could use something under 113 dead deer to catch eagles. And, you know, every dead, I mean, because they basically had a deer dump up there. So every dead deer that they found, you know, they would bring up there and dump. So we thought we had to do the same thing. And it really wasn't until a few years later.
We realized that you only need 1 or 2 deer out there to attract eagles. This is taken in West Virginia. We have similar pictures from places even like Arkansas and Alabama where you have multiple eagles on bait.
And the small forest size, or small openings in the forest like this too.
Yeah, when you put these deer out in a very big opening, you might get a young bird, but typically you get none. And so the small openings really made us think about where these eagles were hanging out. Our telemetry data also started informing that, but it was a big surprise to us and everyone else that you would get this number of birds in a tiny patch of forest, but open forest.
Yeah, so based on our early experiences there, we started a camera trapping project to really study, you know, where they were. And remember back then, golden eagles weren't being seen in the winter at all. And so, you know, but we knew from the first camera traps we started putting up in West Virginia and Pennsylvania that we put them out, and even though they weren't being seen, they started showing up. So we started a camera trap study to study the population size, demography, and distribution of the eastern golden eagle. We had over 200 collaborators and 250 camera traps.
And importantly, from those data, we know that golden eagles winter in every state in eastern North America, which is pretty amazing.
So yeah, we've collected tons and tons, hundreds of thousands of images of millions, I guess, yeah, of eagles. You know, many with multiple eagles at the carcass. You know, and this tiny little opening in northern Pennsylvania was one of the sites that we tracked at, and also one of the sites that we had, you know, many birds.
Mike had like 7 birds around him near that site at one time, 7 golden eagles. So one thing we get some pretty flirty and flaunting eagles like this one at Laurel Mountain in Pennsylvania. We called her America's Next Top Model because she really strutted her stuff.
Oftentimes you see some really intriguing things. Here, there's a young golden eagle on the left and an adult golden eagle at the right. Seemingly, the adult golden eagle is feeding the young golden eagle. And, we don't know, if this was, it's a chick or not. But it could have been an instinctual thing where the eagle, the baby eagle or the young eagle at this point, it was bagging at a carcass and just instinct kicked in and it started feeding it. But either way, we saw some really, really cool things like that.
We also picked up this photo of an eagle. If you look around its head, it's got porcupine quills stuck on its face. And this actually resulted in a publication talking about porcupines and eagles. So clearly they try to eat porcupines in the winter as well.
Other cool things like, here, we had a carcass in northern Pennsylvania. Frequently ravens would come down and eat from the carcass. And here you see a skirmish between a red-tailed hawk and a raven. Potentially that raven was could have been injured. We don't know. In the third photograph, you see a golden eagle coming and grabbing that raven and then eating it just right off the carcass there. So really cool other kinds of things happening at carcasses.
We didn't just get golden eagles, we get bald eagles, and lots of them in some places. This is in northern Pennsylvania.
Lots of interactions between eagles. And we always like to think that the golden eagles had the upper hand at the carcass and would but
It's not always the case. You also get things like horned owls, barred owls.
Red-tailed hawks.
We got this leucistic red-tailed hawk,
Rough-legged hawks.
red shoulders, even things like red-bellied woodpeckers and chickadees.
And rodents, all kinds of rodents.
Including
snowshoe hare.
Oh yeah.
and a mouse. You can see the mouse on top of the carcass.
2 mice.
Two mice, yeah.
Ermine, yeah. Bobcats, lots of bobcat photos, including this one. There are actually 4 bobcats in this photo and 1 dead raccoon in a pile of deer. We even get bear.
Fisher.
And of course, coyotes.
And one of the cool things, if you look on the right, spotted skunks, they're different than the normal skunks that we get. They were, highly endangered, believed to be extirpated from West Virginia, and caught this one on the camera.
Which actually led to a much bigger project and led by this guy, Chuck Waggy. And this is Chuck's truck. He put this deer carcass as a camera trap on a road in West Virginia. He went down to check one of his spotted skunk camera traps. And within 5 minutes, there was a golden eagle on that carcass, despite his truck being there.
Here's a image we got from a person that had a camera trap at their property in Pennsylvania. Oh, this is in West Virginia, sorry. And it was caching a kill there. Notice the size of that bobcat and the size of this golden eagle that came and drug it out from underneath that carcass. This was kind of our first inkling that maybe golden eagles could smell. There was, other incidents during the spotted skunk project that Chuck Waggy actually had bait hidden inside of a log, and a golden eagle comes walking up on the camera trap and takes the bait out from inside of the log. So
sometimes they just give you a nice post.
Yeah.
So one of the cool things is actually getting to watch when they have videos that these birds don't fly directly to bait. They walk in and sometimes they try to kill it. This is problematic because one of the threats to eagles is getting caught in leg hold traps. And the reason they can get caught in leg hold traps that aren't set on the bait is because they walk into their bait. So this is how we catch them.
This was down in Alabama, actually. So at the time, it was a huge deal because, you know, a few years before that, they didn't even know they had golden eagles wintering in Alabama.
So we set up a net launcher on this deer carcass, and then we sit in the blind and we wait for the eagles to come in and start feeding. And then we shoot the net out over them and catch it.
And here you're going to see me. I'll save, you know, me running out, but I run out and get the eagle out from under the net, which is actually a very quick process. You know, a lot of people think that, you know, it should be hard, but it really isn't. You know, minutes later, we have the golden eagle in hand, and then we start to process it. There's a close up of their head. Their eyes, as many of you probably know, their eyes start off a really dark brown, and as they get older, they have yellow highlights that come into their eyes. Males, you know, get much more brilliant yellow eyes than females.
We start the banding process. We put a hood on their head and booties on their feet to protect both them and us. The hood calms them down, and we take measurements. Lots of measurements. We use a yardstick to take those measurements. We take bill measurements, foot pad measurements, and just check out how big, this is a female golden eagle. Check how big that back talon is on the hallux. It's as big as Mike's thumb. So this is why they can kill things that are much bigger than them.
Yeah, and if you look also at the yellow toning of the foot and compare that with this one, you know, we think that you can actually see some of the age-related things, like this being a really old bird, and this bird was a younger adult. So you can actually see some of the aging in their feet as well.
So we also take blood samples. There's Phoebe helping us out. And we use those samples to look at DNA, heavy metals, and we use it as an archive. Then we weigh them and put on a telemetry unit, like a backpack like this.
And this is actually one of the earlier satellite units. The cellular units did not have antennas. Here's one of the early cellular units.
And then once we have tagged them, we release them. And this let them fly off into the fog.
This is actually in Georgia.
Yeah, in Georgia, Northwest Georgia. That bird actually ended up going to the Northwest Territories. So over the next several years, you can see the tracking data that we started collecting on these birds. We mostly started in West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and then all our birds were going up to Quebec and Labrador. Once we started trapping in the Southeast, we started picking up different migration routes through the Great Lakes. We started picking in Ontario and Manitoba. This year we trapped in Arkansas. Those birds aren't on the list on this map, but they went way up past Churchill. One of them is a young male, went up past Churchill in Manitoba, and the other one's way up in Nunavut, far to the north, and looks like she's probably breeding.
Some of our golden eagles are spotted during migration. Here's a couple of them actually that were spotted in Hawk Mountain and Wagner's Gap. We routinely get photographs from Hawk Watch sites with our eagles on them, which is really cool to correlate that along with their camera or with their data.
And many of the telemetry eagles show up at camera traps like this one in Virginia. And over 60 of the trap sites have at least been visited by at least one transmitted golden eagle. Some of the eagles appear to be rather habitual. This eagle visited the same camera trap 5 years in a row, not this camera trap that it was originally trapped at either.
Some of them actually camp out right next to the bait pile, which is not too surprising, but that pair, actually, there was a pair that we suspected, a male and a female, that were hanging out there. And here's one of the interesting behaviors. on the camera trap, started seeing them bringing in sticks to cover the carcasses. And this is something usually we see with bobcats, but usually not with eagles, but pretty cool.
So we found that almost all adult golden eagles return to the same small wintering area each year. But not all eagles follow the rules. So we caught this male up in near Stone Mountain Hawk Lodge in Pennsylvania. And we found that in his subsequent migrations, he would go down to Virginia for December, and then he would head north and go and spend the rest of the winter up in Pennsylvania. But you don't find out these things until you've tracked enough birds to look at that.
And the other cool thing that we found out early on in the study is most eagles spend most of their time in the forest during winter, which is something that, contrary to Western golden eagles, which are more open areas, this is why you don't see golden eagles much in the east in the winter, and why we kind of call them the ghosts of the eastern forests.
So there's certainly Walter Spofford, who was one of the first people to really look at golden eagles and study on their eastern breeding grounds. He said, no doubt that the steep hills furnish excellent obstructional air currents for soaring flight, as well as some cover for these large and conspicuous birds. I don't think that Dr. Spofford realized the cover that they were getting in the forest, because even he thought that they used these open bald areas exclusively during winter. Sometimes we actually capture interactions between two eagles in our telemetry data. So this is these are two different birds that we caught in Alabama, different years. Hopefully this will not be too choppy for you guys. We caught them in 2 different years, and they occasionally meet up and will soar together. Sorry, this looks.
The network is kind of messing things up, but hopefully you can see that
they actually spent time together in a thermal. So this is really neat to see. Sorry, no, that's right. Skip this one.
Yeah.
Sorry, skip that. Sorry. So we moved to Cape May in 2015 and started tagging birds at the Cape that were caught in Cape May in I think 2016. And this is one of the really unexpected things that we found is we caught this bird, or it's the bird I caught in the meadows. And when he left, he went north and all the way west and flew past the Allegheny Front Hawkwatch. So who would have thought that a bird that was seen in Cape May would also be seen at the Allegheny Front Hawkwatch in the same fall? That's just kind of crazy to me and very unexpected.
Yeah, you would have expected the migration track to go the other direction, which is kind of just crazy.
We also, tagged an adult that was caught in a leg hold trap up in Toms River, New Jersey. This is an adult female. Kathy Clark helped us with that. And that bird ended up spending the breeding season up in northern Quebec, but when she came back down, we figured she would go out to the marshes, but she didn't. She actually spent the winter that we were able to track her in the pinelands in dense pine forest in New Jersey. And that is something that none of us expected. So we haven't learned only about what kind of habitats they're using, but we've also, with the high resolution data, been able to look at how wind affects their flight behavior. We saw that wind causes thermals and the birds soaring in those thermals to drift. And so they drift with the wind direction. So if the wind direction is from the west, they'll drift to the west. If it's from the south, they'll drift to the north, or I said the east, and then, yeah. And so we, go ahead.
Yeah, so we, and early on, we used that to identify different types of behaviors that our eagles were doing. And, so like things like thermal streets where they're moving at very high altitudes very quickly, and tried to also associate different behaviors with their risk to wind energy development. So thermal streets shown here, puts them at it's very low risk to wind energy because they're much higher than the turbine blades. And thermal storing, which we see a lot at hawk watches. Birds move from low to high altitudes. They have a moderately fast migration strategy, but does put them at a moderate risk to wind energy development. Slope storing, and this is the most common one we see at especially ridge sites in the east. That's the highest risk from wind energy development because they are flying at a low altitude, and they're pretty much lowest net gain of distance per day because they're moving at a much slower speed.
So we picked up on some migration patterns that we've seen that in spring, their departure dates are bimodal, meaning they peak in early March and then they peak again in mid-April. And that's really the influence of, yeah, where's it going?
No.
Well, is it going? Sorry, there it goes. So that this migration timing is influenced by weather. It's also influenced by climate and age. So age influences timing of spring migration, but not fall migration. So in spring, we see the adults moving earlier and the juveniles moving later. Adults are improving their fitness by arriving on the breeding grounds early, but not too early. But during fall, all birds are trying to conserve energy. And young birds are trying to conserve energy during spring because they don't have a need to get up there really quickly. I think the videos aren't going fast enough. Sorry. This is actually some of the data we've collected in the Western US, but it shows a nice influence of leading lines at a broad scale. So a leading line is a line between suitable and unsuitable habitat or a feature that allows for expedited travel. So like along the Rocky Mountains, you see eagles migrating on the edge. Leading ridge lines, like in the Appalachians, concentrate eagles at places like Tussey Mountain in the spring or fall. And at finer scales, we see that eagles follow shorelines like this of Lake Superior. So but they only do that in fall on the North Shore, and they do it in spring on the South Shore. It makes complete sense, and it's why we put the hawk watches where we put them. This is one of the really, I think, cool things is that they follow the shorelines of lakes, but they also follow the shorelines of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And you can see on the lower part where all the blue lines are, that's the Gaspé Peninsula. And many birds get stuck migrating north. They get stuck on the Gaspé Peninsula and they'll mill around and mill about on there and even try to cross some of the bigger stretches of water, which can actually be deadly. We've had at least 2 birds die crossing the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So migration routes are learned. First-year birds have very little knowledge of the landscape. They've never been there before. They're kind of heading south, following an instinctual path. Just go south is what their brain is telling them. But after they've migrated, I'm sorry, this isn't working well. After they've first traveled south, then they start to learn. So this bird was a young bird, female that we caught in Alabama, and she first headed north and she hit Lake Erie, right? She hit Lake Erie, and then she didn't want to cross Lake Erie, so she turned back around and she went back south, and then she headed north, and then she hit Chicago and Lake Michigan. And she didn't like that, so she turned back south. I really think she was trying to go up through Michigan, but she didn't find that. And she went all the way back down, almost to where actually almost to where we caught her. And she headed back north, and she finally found the Appalachian Mountains. And that is where she ended up migrating for the next 3 years until, go next slide, until she died trying to cross the Gulf of St. Lawrence.
So one of the
Just
things
want to
that-
let you guys know that we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we leave some time for questions.
Okay,
I'll try to hurry.
so that,
So the maximum
Okay.
distance that we've noticed them being traveled is 528 kilometers. And that's still this day the longest track we have and fastest track. And so the conservation concerns, obviously, that we talked about, wind energy development. Trish did a lot, with her work, with her PhD, looking at making models to try to look at best placement for wind turbine placement to help guide wind energy development.
essentially what we found, not just based on their migration, but based on where they're wintering, that there's high consequences for developing high elevation ridge tops, because they're not only important during spring and fall migration, but they're also important during winter. Oh. So we're gonna skip some stuff.
Yeah,
So we said that we take blood samples from every bird. Most golden eagles have been exposed to lead from ammunition. This resulted in a paper being published in Science, where we found that 50% of both eagle species nationwide have chronic lead exposure. We found that golden eagle populations are being suppressed by about 1% annually due to mortality from lead poisoning, which is obviously problematic for a species that is stable at best.
Yeah, one of the quick stories that we'll share is, we talked about lake hold traps and how they're detrimental to golden eagles during migration. We rehabbed the golden eagle that was in a lake hold trap. We released it and got 4 years of tracking data. When the signal stopped, we were like, oh, well, we got a year more than we planned on getting with that telemetry device. That's great, because we thought the transmitter just stopped working. However, later on that spring, we got another ping, sent out law enforcement. They were able to track down the spot that the ping came from. They found the band and feathers, along with many turkey vultures still in lake hold traps, as well as another golden eagle inside of a trapper's house. And so, because of transmitting these birds, we often lead to prosecution of individuals that are persecuting bald and or golden eagles or any other species. We've used some of that work to work with the Quebec government, and they use that in making huge strides to change regulation and educate trappers about placement of lake hold traps and trapping. And so we're going to skip a few things here, but one thing I mentioned in the beginning here is this whole Internet of Wildlife, and where the idea is that this whole thing kind of turned on its head, where I use initial transmitter that we use with the Golden Eagle project, and at the company here we're tracking smaller songbirds as well, and the ability for them to be they can only talk to towers because they can't carry a cell phone, and so those towers can connect to the cell phone towers or to home base stations, which can also record vocalizations, and a lot of smaller raptors also can communicate to the same towers. It's a much larger species like vultures or eagles can communicate with the cell towers, and a long time ago I'm like, why can't everything talk together? So recently, the same technology that we first used on golden eagles, we started using. So units on golden eagles or turkey vultures can now talk to all the smaller units and pick up signals from them, and be able to transmit them back to the researchers. So they don't actually have to be in touch with with that. So a golden eagle breeding up in the Arctic can collect blackpoll warbler data and send it back to the researcher without that blackpoll warbler ever going, next to a tower, or, real-time data from poaching can go right back to researchers, or to law enforcement.
So over the years, we've published over 40 papers on our research on golden eagles. And if anybody's interested in any one of them, we're happy to share them. We've had this project was not the project of the 2 or 3 people that started it, but it took dozens and dozens of people on the ground to make this project happen. And I don't even think this list is complete.
And then, yeah, golden eagles really do have do a really good job of bringing lots of people together. That's just a fact. So you never know where an opportunity will take you. This has been a golden opportunity for us. We formed a company and a nonprofit. Tricia's gotten her Ph.D. and we work with so many people all across the world and learn so much about golden eagles in the East.
We have a much better understanding of threats that they face and have used our data to develop conservation and management plans. The data collection and project continue. We can't wait to see what the next 15 years bring. Golden eagles not only changed our lives, but they changed the lives of so many others. And we would really like to dedicate this talk to Tom Dick. He was the founder of the Allegheny Front Hawk Watch and simply an amazing person who helped us in so many ways when we started the project. Tom passed away recently from a short battle with COVID, and he's going to be deeply missed.
Yeah.
So, next one.
Oh, thank you so much, Trish and Mike. That was amazing. I've heard so much about Tom Dick, and I know that we have a board member writing up an article about just everything he contributed to the Hawkwatch community. I'm looking forward to reading. That was just amazing. I don't know about anybody else, but I'd like to just stay on all day and watch that again and keep asking questions. And it's so fascinating. Really, I've loved seeing your evolution of, your careers and just the cell tracking evolution and how the technology has improved and what we are able to learn now. It's absolutely amazing. We do have questions. I know we're getting very close to 1 o'clock, and hopefully people can stay on a few extra minutes. If you do have questions, add them to the chat. We have a lot of people tuning in from across the continent, so I'll just jump into questions. We have one from Jim. Do you have any information? I know you mentioned lead poisoning briefly. Do you have any information on deer dumps and the issue of lead ammunition and eagle toxicity? There's been numerous cases with bald eagles in Western Michigan.
So typically the thought is that eagles pick up lead from gut piles. If deer have been shot and die and end up in a deer dump, then they could also pick it up from a deer dump. But the bigger problem is animals left in the field or gut piles left in the field.
Yeah, I mean the other thing to note is that all the golden eagles we use in our camera trap studies were all ones that were roadkill individuals, or the deer, sorry, or ones that had been scanned. So we knew that there wasn't any lead in stuff that we were putting out. And there's another question on there that's similar to this. I mean, it is worth pursuing still. The problem is because of there's a number of states that have stopped this, for a couple different reasons, but
mostly because of CWD.
Yeah, but it's a lot harder to do what we did back then. But yeah, it is still worth pursuing, and you can certainly email us for more information about that.
Okay. Chris is wondering, is camera trapping at carcasses still worth pursuing for research purposes? Are you guys still actively doing that?
We are actually, especially in places where there isn't a lot of information still. So we did some well, we did some trapping in Arkansas this year, and previously they'd only gotten 1 or 2 golden eagles on bait, but when they put them in the right place, they started to see a lot more eagles. And so we had planned to be there for like 3 weeks trying to trap and get 1 bird, and we ended up being there for trapping for 2 days because there are a lot more birds. So in places like that in the Ozarks where there's just not a lot of information on the distribution, other places where there hasn't been a lot of camera trapping, it's worth it. It may not be worth it in places like Pennsylvania or West Virginia or Virginia where they've done significant amount. So.
Okay. Chris asks, do all age golden eagles migrate annually? Territorial adult bald eagles seem to stay on territory through the fall and winter.
Yes, so all the ones that we have tagged have. So, but however, some of the birds in the southern part that breed in the Gaspé Peninsula don't migrate every year. But the majority do. So it's probably in certain years there's enough food availability or enough access to food that those birds don't have to migrate. But most do.
Okay. Vance is wondering, you mentioned, I think 5,000 for the estimated population for the East. He's wondering if you have the Eastern population estimate versus Western.
Western lower 48 is about 31,000. Alaska, they recently estimated at 12 or 17, 12 or 17,000. There's no estimate for the Canadian population of Western Canada population.
Okay. Thank you. Harry is wondering if you can comment on climate change and available nesting habitat in the far north.
Fortunately, no, because that's, one of the crazy things is that that's one of the places we still have yet to visit, is we've never been up to the far north here. We've only been to the nesting grounds in the Arctic in Sweden.
And in Alaska. But in the East, I mean, there's some folks in Quebec that are starting to do more studies on the breeding population. But what we know from Alaska is that there's shrub intrusion, but that may not be a bad thing because that's where the hares live. So, I mean, honestly, we don't have enough information to look at how climate change will affect them.
Oh, okay. Jesse's wondering if you have any observations in New Brunswick, Canada.
We might have some tracks, I'm not sure, but we don't have any birds spending any significant amount of time in New Brunswick.
Okay. Trudy is asking if how much of a problem is bird flu for golden eagles? Any idea?
It's probably
thoughts?
less of a problem for most golden eagles than it is for bald eagles, simply because most of what golden eagles are mostly hunting more terrestrial prey. You may get some effect of bird flu if for those birds that are in the marshes hunting waterfowl, like you do. That's the big problem with bald eagles is the prey that they're eating and that they're in these more wetland environments where bird flu is more prevalent.
Okay. A few more questions before we let you go. Ryan is wondering, is there a difference in morphometric measurements between the Eastern and Western race?
We think so, but we haven't done a formal analysis to compare those. There's some suggestions from our data that the legs are bigger in the Eastern birds than the Western birds. But
okay,
that gets confusion because you have all of the birds we catch are migrants from the north, which are typically larger than the birds that are breeding in the lower 48.
That was very cool. I just speaking about the feet, I thought that was really interesting that you can really see the aging on the older birds on their legs.
Qualitatively more than anything.
Yeah. Lynn is wondering if you have if there have been any sightings in northern Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of birds that migrate through there, but there's also some photos you can look on the internet where a bird was near, I think, northwest Illinois somewhere, chasing a deer through a cornfield. So there's some good photos from there. I'm sure that they're wintering up there. They're definitely wintering in southern Illinois. One of our birds was wintering down there. Unfortunately, it died from lead poisoning this year.
Oh, wow.
And there's some that winter, along the entire Mississippi River corridor in Illinois, and of course, in the northern part of that, you get into the driftless area, and a lot of in the driftless area. So yeah, there's quite a lot.
Okay, so they're there. Maybe one last question here from Trudy. Is there a web page with these telemetry tracks anywhere where people can follow some of this research?
We have so many birds that we don't post updates all the time, but there are some some maps on consciglobal.org. I'll put it in the chat. How's that?
Oh, great. Thank you. Mike's squeezing in one last question while you're doing that.
Sure.
Are there breeding concentrations in different parts of northern Quebec that you know of?
Well,
like concentrations.
that's hard. That's hard to tell. I mean, because most of Quebec has not been surveyed for nests. So the areas that they've surveyed, they've found them. But it's such a large area and so difficult to survey that we can't really say that there are concentrations.
Right. You can say that. We have a huge smattering of nests across the entire, all of the north there. So it's. Yeah.
We do think that there is a concentration area for not just for young birds. Called Kuujjuaq, which is south of the Ungava Bay. In that area, we get a lot of young birds that go and spend some part of the summer in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, just to close, I think based on those tracks that you showed past Braddock Bay, we should start being able to count these birds in our, even if we're not at the Hawk Watch, I think we should try and start counting those birds that, fly through with transmitters. We'll have to run that by the data committee. What's that?
What I didn't show is that the birds that you get up at Braddock Bay tend to be these young birds, because the young birds, they just want to go north. And so when they just go north, they'll hit the lakes like that one young bird I showed you. So that's why you get a peak at Braddock later and Derby later in this season than you get a peak at the ridgetop hawk watches in like March when you get all the adults moving by. So the adults move up the mountain chain. They know where the lakes are because they've probably done that in the past. And then you get these young birds that hit Braddock and Derby and other lakefront hawk watches in the April.
But there is a precedence for adding birds that you don't see to lists. State lists are adding species just because a telemeter bird, wandered into their state boundaries, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. We'll have to think about that. Well, thank you so much, Trish and Mike. That was fabulous. I am going to turn things over to Josh, but thanks everybody.
All right. Just thank you again, Tricia and Mike. Appreciate all the time that you put into getting this put together. I know it takes quite a bit of extra work. So, Amanda, thanks you greatly. And as always, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great, a great program. We had really great participation and great engagement this time, so very thankful for that. Stay tuned to next month. We'll be meeting on September 14th, and we're happy to welcome Bill Clark, many of which you know. Many of you know him. And he's going to speak to us on unusual raptor plumages. So that's surely going to be a good talk as well. So thanks again, everybody. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to next month. Have a good day.